Confident of Arevus, Kol Yisrael Arevus Elazar, that Jews are responsible for one another, as the Gemara says, that if a person has the ability to intercede to prevent another person from sinning, and he doesn't, he's held liable for the sin of that person, because he could have made a difference regarding that person failing or not failing. So over here, we're delineating all the various segments, elements of Klal Yisrael. The leaders, they're the most culpable. Why? Because they, in terms of the way they're perceived and revered by the community, they have the ability to make that difference. Because they're leaders, that's the leadership. Each head of a household, because he's the head of the household, if the family should fail, he's held culpable because he could have made the difference regarding his family. So each various grouping regarding whatever their extent of influence is, to that degree they're held culpable because they could have made a difference. So this is bris we're speaking here is the bris of Arevus. Kol Yisrael Arevus Elazar. Every Jew is responsible for one another. The Ran we had mentioned, Rosh Hashanah tells us, we have a concept known as one Jew could cover the other Jew in his Torah obligation. For instance, Rosh Hashanah is coming up now. So a person has an obligation to hear the shofar and he's not able to blow the shofar himself. Even if one person already had fulfilled his personal obligation of shofar, he's able to cover the other person in that mitzvah. Excuse me. What's the rationale? Why could one cover the other person's obligation, although he fulfilled his obligation? As long as they're both on par regarding their obligation. So the Ran explains in Rosh Hashanah that since there is the covenant of Arevus, all Jews are responsible for one another, so I'm responsible that the other Jew should fulfill his obligation. So if he hasn't yet fulfilled his obligation, although the person himself has fulfilled his own personal obligation, he's able to enter into the position to cover the other person. This is the concept by Kiddush, by all mitzvahs. The reason why one Jew is able to cover the other Jew is based on this principle of all Jews are responsible for one another, responsible to make sure that every Jew fulfills his responsibility to Hashem. This is what we're speaking about right now. So just as in the positive commandment, I'm able to cover you because I'm responsible for you, identically, if I could have made a difference where a person should not sin, if I would have intervened, and I did not, I am held culpable, but again, that's only the person who could have made the difference. So therefore, who are the most culpables? The most culpable are the leaders. The leadership is the most. Of course, if the leadership is really as they should be, the people behave properly. And if not. We have that the Gemara tells us in Shabbos, we studied this together, that at the time of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to the angel of death that he should write on the foreheads of all the Rishonim the letter Tuf and the letter Red. Red means death, means mess, the person will die. And of the tzaddikim, he should write the letter Tuf in black. If you're in the black, you live. If in the red, you die. So the Midas Adin, the attribute of justice, comes to Hashem and says, why? Even the tzaddikim deserve to perish with the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. So Hashem says, but the tzaddikim. So the Midas Adin, the attribute of justice, says to Hashem, because when the Jews sinned, they remained silent. They should have said something. They should have intervened. So Hashem says to the Midas Adin, but even if they would have intervened, it wouldn't have helped. The Jews wouldn't have listened. So the Midas Adin says to Hashem, but did the tzaddikim, did they know that? They weren't aware of that. And since they did not, they deserve to perish together with the Rishonim. So when Hashem heard that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to the Midas Adin, paint the letter Tuf in red, even on the foreheads of the tzaddikim. So we're saying, see over here, that even if factually they would have interceded, it would have fallen on deaf ears. Not knowing that is already a failing. I mean, how do you stand by and see Chil Hashem, where you're opening your mouth may make the difference, and you don't, what is that? That's the ultimate breach. So therefore, as a result of that, even the tzaddikim themselves deserve to what? Deserve to perish. But bring out an interesting point. It seems over there it was only Midas Adin. If it would have been Midas Arachmim, the attribute of mercy would have been in place, the tzaddik could have gotten by. Since factually it wouldn't have made a difference, therefore, the non-interceding would have made a difference regarding the failing of Klal Yisrael. But of course it was Midas Adin, the attribute of justice, which is so exacting, so what is the claim? Not that it would have made a difference. How do you stand by and watch Chil Hashem and remain silent? That silence itself deserves, for that alone, you deserve to perish. But that's only because it was the Midas Adin. But if not for that, Midas HaRachman would have been in place, they would have survived. But nevertheless, the parsha we're speaking about now is Atem Nitzovim. If you want to survive and live and exist, you have to have kulchem. Kulchem means you have to be responsible for one another. It's not, I have my interests and you have your interests, and I don't meddle in your life. We're kulchem. We're one entity. We'd mentioned name of the Ramak, Ramosh Kurdeviro, that the mitzvah v'ahavta recho kamocha, why a Jew has an obligation to love his fellow as he loves himself, is because every Jew is only a component in the network called Klal Yisrael. So anybody who infuses the network with positive energy, everyone goes forward. Everyone rises. And if a person sins and transgresses, you're actually infusing, bringing into the entity something negative, and everybody's taken down. It was like one body, like a body. If there's an infection in any limb or any part of the body, ultimately the whole body is affected by it. And if the body is strengthened or energized, the whole body is energized. Identically, in terms of mitzvah and chet, it's identically the same. So therefore, atem nitzovim hayom kulchem. Since you're kulchem, you're one entity, therefore you have this level of responsibility in the positive and negative for one another. That's the understanding. And therefore, there's mitzvah haftu recho kamocha. When you love your fellow, factually, it's like loving yourself, because whatever you do for your fellow, you're doing for yourself, because ultimately, you're going to be the beneficiary of whatever that other person does. And he actually contributes to every aspect of your being. That's the understanding. That's the Ramak. It's very interesting. We find that by Kabbalah Torah, it says, Vayichon ha'om kineged ha'hor, in the singular, the people camped opposite the mountain, and Yichan doesn't Vayachnu. It's Yichan is Ki'ish echod b'leiv echod. We were like one entity, and this is this concept. And then we received the Torah. Why does the Torah have to tell us that we were unified to such a degree? Evidently, the reason why the Torah is sharing this with us is because that was a prerequisite to Kabbalah Torah. That if we wouldn't have displayed this characteristic of unity, we wouldn't have been qualified to receive the Torah. It's only because there was that achdus among us, therefore we were qualified to receive the Torah. Why? Because as we always say, that what is the basis for any relationship? Commonality. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's echod, we have to be united. We have to display that characteristic of unity, which is achdus, because we're going to have a relationship with ultimately the one who's one. Hashma Yisrael Shem Elkeinu Hashem Echod. He's the Echod in the absolute sense. So if you want to have a relationship and cleave to that entity, you have to display his characteristic of Echod. This is the idea. So why did we merit? Other nations are not like us. Every Jew is a component of the other Jew. There's a network called Klal Yisrael, and every one of us is an aspect of this entity called Klal Yisrael. And as I said, the Medrash, the Yalkut explains it with an allegory. You have two people sitting in a boat, and one person begins boring a hole under a seat, and his neighbor says to him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm drilling a hole under my seat." He says, "What are you doing?" He says, "It's under my seat, not under your seat." He says, "Yes, but you realize, you bore that hole, the boat goes down. Identically, Klal Yisrael, because we're an entity, whatever one does affects the other Jew. Therefore, responsible in the positive and negative to one another for that reason, because we're one entity. But this only exists by Klal Yisrael, not by the nations of the world. Again, why? Because we are the ones, we have that achdus. Since it was Vayichan Ha'om Keneged Ahor, we in the singular, we camped in the singular, Kish Echod B'Leiv Echod, we displayed that reality, therefore we merited that this unified us, that our spirituality, each neshama of a Jew, complements the neshama of the other Jew. What's proof in the pudding? We have Targum mitzvahs. We have 613 mitzvahs. Positive and negative commandments. You realize the mitzvahs don't have relevance to every Jew. You have the mitzvah which has relevance only to the Kohen. A Kohen officiates in the Beis HaMikdash. The Kohen eats truma. There are many things which have relevance to him, don't have relevance to the non-Kohen. The Levi has his specific mitzvahs in time of the Beis HaMikdash. The ordinary Jew doesn't. The ordinary Jew has mitzvahs which the Kohen is not even permitted to do. He's not permitted to contaminate himself to the dead. A Jew has the obligation or to attend to the burial needs of another Jew. Unless it's a mes mitzvah, that's the only overriding factor where a Kohen's permitted to contaminate himself. So if that's the case, the Ramach and the Shasa, negative commandments, 365, have no relevance to every Jew. So how does a Jew fulfill the Torah in its entirety? The answer is, it's the Klal Yisrael fulfills the mitzvahs in their entirety. Because every Jew being connected and a component of the network called Klal Yisrael has Targum mitzvahs. And when you fuse this entity with the Targum mitzvahs, we're all beneficiaries of that. But as an individual, that's not the case. We find in the Torah that whenever Torah speaks about, and I mentioned this many times, kores, spiritual excision, it says, v'nichroso hanefesh ahi me'ameho. Spiritual excision, you cut off from God. But you'll never find the Torah would ever say, you cut off from God. You cut off from your people. If you cut off from your people, you cut off from God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu only has relevance to Klal Yisrael. That relationship is only with Jews, not with Goyim, not with the nations of the world. So how does one become disenfranchised with Hashem? You cut off from the people. Therefore, whenever it says, V'nichus HaNefshi miYisrael, V'nichus HaNefshi mi'ameo, when you cut off from the people, you no longer have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because we are the entity called Echod. Individual is not Echod. You're only a component in Echod.